Joe Harmon was counting fence posts when he first spotted the dust cloud rising over the eastern ridge of his property. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across his 500 acres of pristine Montana wilderness, land that had been in his family for 4 generations, land that he'd sworn to his dying father he would protect at all costs. "What in the hell?" he muttered, shielding his eyes against the glare. The rumbling grew louder. One vehicle, then another, and another materialized through the haze. A convoy, a goddamn convoy, was heading straight for his front gate. Joe whistled sharply, and within seconds his 2 Caucasian Ovcharkas, massive, bear-like guardian dogs named Thor and Valkyrie, appeared at his side, ears perked forward, muscles tense beneath their thick coats. "Stay close," he told them, reaching for the rifle he kept mounted on his ATV. The lead vehicle, a glossy white SUV with tinted windows, rolled to a stop 20 feet from where Joe stood. The dogs growled, deep and threatening, but remained at his heel as instructed. The driver's door swung open, and out stepped a woman in her 40s with a platinum blonde bob so perfect it seemed lacquered in place. Designer sunglasses perched on her nose, and despite being in the middle of nowhere, she wore white capri pants and a pink blouse that looked fresh off a mannequin. Behind her SUV, a line of vehicles stretched back almost a quarter mile. Buses, vans, cars, and even a few RVs. Joe counted quickly. At least 20 vehicles. "You're trespassing," Joe called out before she could speak. "This is private property." The woman's smile didn't falter as she approached, extending a manicured hand as though they were meeting at a country club luncheon. "Mr. Harmon, I'm Karen Westfield, Executive Director of Camp Enlightenment. Such a pleasure to finally meet you in person." Joe didn't take her hand. Thor and Valkyrie moved slightly forward, their size enough to make the woman take a half step back. "I don't know who you are or what Camp Enlightenment is, but you need to turn around. All of you." He gestured to the line of vehicles where faces, young faces, were pressed against windows, staring out at him. Karen laughed, a tinkling sound that set Joe's teeth on edge. "Oh, there must be some miscommunication. I spoke with a property management company last month. We have a reservation for the entire South Meadow, paid in full." She waved a folder of papers. "We have 100 campers ready for a 2-week wilderness experience. The children are so excited." Joe felt his blood pressure rising. "Ma'am, I don't have a property management company. I've never heard of your camp, and I certainly didn't authorize anyone to use my land." Karen's smile tightened, her eyes narrowing behind her sunglasses. "Well, that's simply not possible. We have contracts, permits, everything's in order." She turned, gesturing to a man who had emerged from the passenger side. "Philip, bring the documentation." As the man approached with another folder, doors began opening on the other vehicles. Children in matching blue t-shirts spilled out, stretching their legs after what must have been a long journey. Counselors, at least a dozen of them, began organizing the kids into groups. "Stop," Joe shouted. "Get those kids back in the vehicles. You can't be here." Thor and Valkyrie sensed his tension and began a low, continuous growl. The nearest children froze, eyes wide with fear. Karen's smile disappeared completely. "Mr. Harmon, I've invested over $200,000 in this summer program. These children's parents have paid premium rates for this exclusive wilderness experience. I have permits from the county. Now, if there's been some misunderstanding, I'm sure we can work something out." She reached into her purse and pulled out a checkbook. Perhaps a rental fee would solve this little hiccup. Joe stared in disbelief as more children continued to pour from the vehicles, counselors unloading equipment, someone even starting to hammer tent stakes into his ground. "Lady," Joe said, his voice dangerously quiet, "you have exactly 5 minutes to reload every last one of those kids and get off my property, or things are going to get real uncomfortable real fast." Karen's eyes flashed with something that looked like triumph. "Is that a threat, Mr. Harmon? Because I have 98 children as witnesses, not to mention our entire staff." She smiled again, cold and calculating. "And I should mention, I'm an attorney." The dogs moved closer to Joe, sensing his anger. The afternoon sun caught their eyes, making them gleam like amber fire. Joe realized this wasn't going to be a simple misunderstanding. This was war. The sun dipped lower behind the western mountains as Joe watched Karen strut back to her group of counselors, huddling them together in an impromptu meeting. His property had suddenly transformed into a chaotic scene. Children racing around, adults unloading equipment, and someone had even started setting up what looked like a portable kitchen near the creek. Joe pulled out his cell phone, cursing when he saw the familiar no service message. His landline was back at the main house nearly a mile away. He needed to go there to call the sheriff, but he couldn't leave these people unsupervised on his land. "Mr. Harmon," Karen called out, approaching again with her entourage of 3 assistants. "I think I understand the confusion. Our paperwork shows we reserved land owned by Harmon Estate LLC." She thrust a document toward him. See, right here. Joe snatched the paper, scanning it quickly. There it was, Harmon Estate LLC. His grandfather had set up that entity decades ago to protect the family assets, but Joe had dissolved it 3 years earlier after his father passed. This LLC doesn't exist anymore. It was dissolved years ago. Whatever paperwork you have is invalid. He handed it back to her. Who did you actually talk to? Karen's perfect smile wavered slightly. A Mr. William Harmon. He was quite accommodating, actually. The blood drained from Joe's face. William Harmon is my cousin. He hasn't had any legal right to this property in over 15 years. A simmering rage began to build in his chest. His estranged cousin had always resented that Joe's father had inherited the main property. This was exactly the kind of vindictive stunt he would pull. Well, Karen said, flicking an imaginary piece of lint from her sleeve, that sounds like a family matter. Our contract is binding, and we've already paid in full. She glanced at her diamond-encrusted watch. It's getting late, Mr. Harmon. These children need to eat and set up camp before dark. Joe looked past her at the sea of young faces. Most seemed excited, but a few looked tired and anxious. Despite his anger, he couldn't ignore the reality. Night was approaching, and sending 100 kids back on the road without a clear destination wasn't an option. Thor and Valkyrie remained vigilant at his side, their enormous frames drawing curious and fearful glances from the campers. One of the counselors, a young man with a scraggly beard and nervous eyes, kept staring at the dogs with increasing anxiety. Those animals should be restrained, Karen said, following Joe's gaze. They're clearly dangerous and a liability around children. Those animals are highly trained livestock guardians worth more than your SUV, Joe replied. And they're the reason I haven't had a single predator attack on my property in 8 years. He patted Thor's massive head. They won't harm anyone who doesn't threaten me or my property. Karen's lips pursed into a thin line. Nevertheless, I'll need them confined while we're here. It's a matter of safety and insurance. Joe laughed, a short, humorless sound. Lady, you're in no position to make demands. You're trespassing, and the only reason I haven't called the sheriff yet is because I don't want a bunch of kids stranded after dark. For a moment, genuine worry crossed Karen's face. Whatever scam his cousin had pulled on her, Joe realized Karen truly believed she had legitimate access to the property. But that moment of vulnerability quickly vanished, replaced by the steely determination he was coming to recognize as her default setting. One night, Joe said finally, you can stay in the South Meadow for one night. At first light, you pack up and go. He pointed at Karen. Meanwhile, you're coming with me to the main house so we can sort this out with the proper authorities. Her eyes narrowed. I'm not going anywhere alone with you. Fine. Bring one of your people. He whistled to the dogs and started walking toward his ATV. But we're resolving this tonight. Karen hesitated, then gestured to Philip, the nervous-looking man from earlier. Stay with the children. Make sure they're fed and settled. She turned to another counselor, a tall woman with a no-nonsense ponytail. Melissa, you're with me. As they approached Joe's ATV, a commotion erupted from the campsite. A group of boys had wandered too close to Joe's storage shed, and one was trying to open the padlocked door. Hey, Joe shouted. Get away from there. The boys scattered, but not before one of them, a lanky teenager in a backwards cap, made a rude gesture in their direction. Charming, Joe muttered, climbing onto his ATV. Is that the wilderness experience you're charging premium rates for? Karen's face flushed, but she maintained her composure as she and Melissa climbed into the ATV's rear seats. These are privileged children, Mr. Harmon. Many of them haven't had proper boundaries. Joe snorted. Well, they're about to learn some. As he started the engine, Thor and Valkyrie took up positions running alongside the vehicle. The setting sun cast long shadows across the land as they headed toward the main house, leaving behind the growing encampment of uninvited guests. In the rearview mirror, Joe could see more tents going up, cooking fires being lit, and children running wild across his carefully maintained property. Something told him that his problems were just beginning, and that Karen Westfield had no intention of leaving after just one night. The main house, a sprawling log cabin that Joe's grandfather had built by hand, sat on a rise overlooking the valley. As they approached, the headlights of the ATV swept across the wide front porch, where 3 more guard dogs lounged, smaller than Thor and Valkyrie, but no less vigilant. They rose to their feet at the sound of the vehicle, alert and watchful. More dogs. Karen's voice held a note of disbelief. Anatolian shepherds, Joe replied, cutting the engine. Shiloh, Ranger, and Coda. They guard the house. Melissa, the counselor, spoke for the first time. How many dogs do you have exactly? 7 total. These 5, plus 2 more patrolling the north fence line. Joe stepped off the ATV and nodded toward the house. The dogs stay outside. They won't bother you unless you make sudden movements or try to touch me. Inside the house, Joe led them to a cluttered office and picked up an ancient landline phone. As he dialed the sheriff's number, Karen wandered around the room, taking in the family photos, hunting trophies, and the large map of the property mounted on one wall. "Sheriff Miller, it's Joe Harmon. I've got a situation out here." He briefly explained about the camp, his cousin's apparent involvement, and the 100 children currently setting up tents on his land. Karen watched him intently, her perfectly manicured fingernails tapping against her crossed arms. "What do you mean you can't come out tonight?" Joe's voice rose in frustration. "There are 100 people trespassing on my property." He listened for a moment, then sighed deeply. "Fine. First thing in the morning, then." He hummed up and turned to Karen. "Sheriff can't make it out tonight. There's been a multi-car pileup on the highway and they're short-staffed already." A small, triumphant smile played at the corners of Karen's mouth. "Well then, I suppose we'll be your guests tonight, Mr. Harmon. Don't get comfortable. Sheriff Miller will be here at 7 a.m. sharp, and then we'll sort out this mess with my cousin." Joe pulled out his cell phone. "Now I'm going to try to reach that snake Will and find out what he was thinking." While Joe stepped into another room to make his call, Karen began examining the property map more closely. Melissa joined her, pointing to various locations. "The South Meadow is perfect," Karen whispered. "Close to water, natural protection from the wind, and look at the access road. We can bring in all our equipment easily." Melissa nodded. "The kids are going to love this place. 2 weeks here will be worth every penny their parents paid." Joe returned, his face a thundercloud. Voicemail. Again. He slammed his phone down on the desk. "My cousin's been dodging my calls for months. Now I know why." Karen turned from the map, composing her features into a mask of professional sympathy. "Mr. Harmon, I understand this is a difficult situation, but perhaps we can turn it into an opportunity." She pulled out her checkbook again. "I'm prepared to pay you directly for use of your land. Say $20,000 for the 2 weeks. Joe stared at her. "This isn't about money. This is my home, not a campground." $30,000 then, Karen offered, pen poised above her checkbook. "The answer is no." Joe moved to the door. "It's getting late. I'll drive you back to your camp." The ride back was tense and silent. When they arrived at the South Meadow, Joe was stunned by the transformation. In just over an hour, the campers had erected dozens of tents in neat rows, set up a large canopy for dining, and even strung solar-powered fairy lights between poles. Children sat in groups around supervised campfires, roasting marshmallows and singing songs. It looked like a professionally run operation, which Joe realized it probably was. Despite his anger at the situation, he had to admit that Karen Westfield knew how to organize. "As you can see, we're fully self-sufficient," Karen said, stepping off the ATV. "We have our own portable toilets, solar showers, and kitchen facilities. We'll leave no trace when we depart." "Which will be tomorrow," Joe reminded her. Karen smiled and reached her eyes. "We'll see what the sheriff has to say." She turned to walk away, then stopped. "Oh, and Mr. Harmon, I took the liberty of having my legal team email over some interesting documentation about this property while we were at your house. It seems your cousin William still owns a 15% stake in Harmon Estate LLC, which, contrary to what you believe, was never properly dissolved." Joe felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. "That's impossible. My father bought out Will's share before he died." "Did he complete the transfer? File all the proper paperwork?" Karen raised a perfectly groomed eyebrow. "Because our research suggests otherwise. I look forward to discussing this with the sheriff in the morning." She walked away, leaving Joe standing beside his ATV, Thor and Valkyrie pressing against his legs as if sensing his distress. Later that night, after returning to the main house, Joe dug through his father's old files until he found the folder labeled William Property Transfer. His heart sank as he realized Karen might be right. The paperwork was incomplete, missing signatures, unfiled forms. His father's declining health in his final years had left many matters unresolved. From the porch, he could see the glow of the camp in the distance, fairy lights twinkling like fallen stars. The dogs paced restlessly, sensing his agitation. His phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. "Hey cousin, heard you met my business partner Karen. Hope you're enjoying the company. Maybe now you'll consider my offer to buy you out. Will?" Joe's hands clenched into fists. This wasn't just a misunderstanding or a scam. It was deliberate sabotage, an attempt to force him into selling the land his family had protected for generations. He walked out into the yard, staring at the distant lights of the camp, then up at the star-filled Montana sky. Thor and Valkyrie flanked him, their massive frames silhouetted against the moonlight. "Well, boys," he said quietly, "looks like we've got a fight on our hands." The dogs rumbled their agreement, eyes gleaming in the darkness as they gazed toward the intruders' camp. 3 days passed, and Camp Enlightenment showed no signs of moving on. If anything, they were expanding their footprint. Joe watched from the ridge above the meadow as more equipment arrived. Mountain bikes, kayaks for the creek, and even a portable climbing wall. The camp had settled into a routine with activity rotations, meal times, and evening campfires that Joe could hear from his porch when the wind was right. His lawyer had filed for an emergency injunction, but the earliest court date was still a week away. Meanwhile, Joe was stuck with 100 unwanted guests who seemed determined to turn his private sanctuary into an adventure park. "They're heading toward the north pasture," observed Megan, Joe's ranch hand who helped with the livestock. She lowered her binoculars and frowned. "Looks like a hiking group." Joe tensed. The north pasture was where he kept his small herd of highland cattle, shaggy, horned beasts that were generally gentle but fiercely protective of their cows. It was also where his other two guard dogs, Denali and Yukon, patrolled. "I better head them off," Joe said, climbing onto his ATV. "Keep an eye on things here." He took off down the hill, Thor and Valkyrie racing alongside him. As he approached the hiking group, about 20 kids with 3 adult counselors, he could see they had already crossed the fence line that clearly marked the boundary of the South Meadow. Joe cut the engine and stepped off the ATV, blocking their path. The counselor in front, a young man with dreadlocks and a Camp Enlightenment shirt, stopped abruptly. "This area is off limits," Joe stated firmly. "You need to turn around." The counselor consulted a map in his hands. "According to our trail guide, this is part of the approved hiking route." "Your trail guide is wrong. This is the north pasture. I have cattle here and 2 guard dogs who won't take kindly to strangers approaching their herd." As if on cue, Denali and Yukon appeared on the ridgeline of them, their white coats stark against the blue sky. Unlike Thor and Valkyrie, who had been socialized around visitors, these two were purely working dogs with little human contact outside of Joe and Megan. The children murmured nervously at the sight of the massive dogs. "Listen, man," the counselor said, lowering his voice. "We're just trying to follow the program Karen set up. She'll have my job if I don't complete the nature hike as planned." Joe pointed back toward the meadow. "Your boss doesn't make the rules here. The agreement with the sheriff was that you stay in the South Meadow only." A familiar voice called from behind the group. "Is there a problem here?" Karen Westfield appeared, walking briskly up the trail in hiking boots that somehow still managed to look fashionable. 2 more counselors flanked her. "Your hikers are trespassing in a restricted area," Joe said. "There are cattle here and dogs trained to protect them." Karen surveyed the scene, eyes lingering on Denali and Yukon watching from above. "Our permit covers recreational use of the entire property, Mr. Harmon." "Your so-called permit, signed by my cousin who hasn't set foot on this land in years, specified the South Meadow." Joe stood his ground. "Sheriff Miller made that clear. He suggested we stay in the South Meadow as a courtesy, not as a legal requirement." Karen turned to the children. "Everyone take 5 while I sort this out." The kids gratefully sat down on rocks and fallen logs, pulling water bottles from their backpacks. Karen moved closer to Joe, lowering her voice. "Mr. Harmon, this hostility is unnecessary. We're operating a legitimate business here." "On stolen lands," Joe replied. Karen sighed. "Your family issues are not my concern. I made a business arrangement with a legal co-owner of this property. If you have a problem with that, take it up with your cousin." "Oh, I plan to. Right after I get you and your entire operation off my land." "That's not happening." Karen's pleasant facade slipped, revealing the steel beneath. "I have 98 children from some of the wealthiest families in the country. Their parents paid $8,000 each for this experience. Do you understand what kind of people we're talking about? Senators' kids, tech CEOs' kids, Hollywood directors' kids." Joe crossed his arms. "And that's supposed to impress me." "It should concern you," Karen replied coolly. "These are people with influence and endless resources for legal battles. By the time your injunction hearing comes around, I'll have gathered so many powerful allies that you won't stand a chance." Joe had spent his life avoiding politics and power games, preferring the straightforward relationships between man, animal, and land. But he recognized a threat when he heard one. "So that's your play? Use these kids as pawns to force me out. They're getting an exclusive wilderness experience. Everyone wins." Karen glanced at her watch. "Now we're going to continue our hike as planned. Unless you intend to physically block us." Her eyes glinted with challenge. Before Joe could respond, a commotion erupted from the group of children. One of the boys had wandered away from the others and was now standing alarmingly close to a mother Highland cow and her calf. The massive horned beast was pawing the ground, head lowered in warning. "Tyler, get back here," one of the counselors shouted, starting forward. "Don't move," Joe commanded, his voice stopping everyone in their tracks. "Nobody move or shout." The boy, Tyler, seemed frozen in fear as the Highland cow took a threatening step toward him. Joe whistled sharply, a specific pattern of notes that carried across the pasture. Immediately, Denali and Yukon sprang to action, racing down the hillside with astonishing speed. The children gasped as the huge white dogs streaked past them. Karen grabbed Joe's arm. "What are they doing?" "Call them off." Joe shook her off. "Watch." With precision that came from years of training, the dogs circled wide around the cow and calf, positioning themselves between the animals and the boy. Denali moved in a slow, deliberate pattern that drew the cow's attention away from Tyler, while Yukon positioned himself to create an escape route. "Tyler," Joe called calmly, "look at me, not the cow. Start walking backward very slowly. The white dog on your right is going to guide you." The terrified boy did as instructed, taking small backward steps as Yukon moved with him, maintaining the buffer between child and cattle. Within a minute, Tyler was safely back among the group, where a counselor wrapped a protective arm around him. The Highland cow, still annoyed but no longer threatened, shepherded her calf away with a final warning snort. Denali and Yukon remained on guard, watching the cattle move to a safer distance before trotting back up to their observation point on the ridge. A stunned silence fell over the group. Several of the children were wide-eyed, a few were crying, and the counselors looked pale. "That," Joe said quietly to Karen, "is why you stay in the South Meadow. Next time, my dogs might not be able to intervene in time." For once, Karen seemed at a loss for words. The precision and control of the guard dogs had clearly rattled her confidence. "Take your hikers back to camp," Joe continued. "And if I find any of your people outside the South Meadow again, I'll call the sheriff for in." The Bosman courthouse steps were bathed in morning sunlight as Joe climbed them, accompanied by his new attorney, Richard Westbrook. The renowned lawyer had flown in from New York 3 days earlier, bringing with him a team of legal assistants and a determination that surprised even Joe. "Remember," Westbrook said as they approached the doors, "let me do the talking. Karen Westfield may have connections, but she's about to learn she's not the only one." Inside, the courtroom was already filling up. Joe recognized several of the camp counselors, including Philip and Melissa, sitting behind Karen and her legal team. Karen herself looked immaculate as always, this time in a conservative navy suit that screamed authority and competence. She barely concealed her surprise when she saw Richard Westbrook beside Joe. The momentary widening of her eyes was the first genuine reaction Joe had seen from her. "All rise," called the bailiff as Judge Eleanor Martinez entered the courtroom. The emergency injunction hearing moved quickly. Karen's attorney presented their case first, showing the documentation signed by William Harmon, explaining the incomplete dissolution of Harmon Estate LLC and emphasizing the economic and logistical hardships that would result from forcing the camp to relocate mid-session. "Your Honor," Karen's attorney concluded, "Camp Enlightenment has acted in good faith throughout this process, obtaining what we believe to be legitimate permission from a legal co-owner of the property. The children's welfare should be the primary consideration here." Joe bristled at the implication that he was somehow endangering the children, but Westbrook placed a calming hand on his arm. When it was their turn, Westbrook approached the bench with confident ease. "Your Honor, while opposing counsel has presented an interesting narrative, there are several critical facts they conveniently omitted." He opened a folder. "First, I present Exhibit A, the original dissolution paperwork for Harmon Estate LLC, which was indeed filed correctly with the Secretary of State in 2018. He handed documents to the judge and Karen's attorney. The clerical error that Ms. Westfield's team discovered was a misfiling in the county records, not the state records. The LLC was legally dissolved, as these state-certified documents confirm." Karen leaned forward to whisper urgently to her attorney, who looked increasingly concerned. Furthermore, Westbrook continued, even if the LLC had somehow remained intact, William Harmon's ownership stake was transferred to Joseph Harmon Sr. before his death, as evidenced by Exhibit B, the notarized transfer agreement and banking records showing the transaction. Joe watched as Karen's composed facade began to crack. She hadn't expected this level of counterattack. "Finally, Your Honor," Westbrook said, "I'd like to address the supposed recreational use clause in the operating agreement. Exhibit C is the original operating agreement filed with the state at the creation of the LLC. You'll note that it contains no such clause." He paused dramatically. The document Ms. Westfield presented appears to have been altered quite recently based on digital forensic analysis. We've included an affidavit from a forensic document examiner confirming this finding. Murmurs spread through the courtroom. Judge Martinez called for order. "Your Honor," Westbrook concluded, "based on these facts, we request not only that you grant the emergency injunction requiring Camp Enlightenment to vacate Mr. Harmon's property immediately, but also that you refer this matter to the district attorney for investigation of potential document fraud." The judge reviewed the documents carefully, occasionally looking up at Karen and her increasingly uncomfortable attorney. After several tense minutes, she removed her glasses. "I've seen enough. The emergency injunction is granted. Camp Enlightenment must vacate the Harmon property within 48 hours. She fixed Karen with a stern gaze. And I am referring this matter to the DA's office for further investigation into the possible falsification of legal documents. She banged her gavel. We're adjourned. The courtroom erupted in whispers and movement. Joe felt a weight lift from his shoulders as he shook Westbrook's hand. Thank you. I don't know how to repay you for this. Your dogs saved my son, Westbrook replied simply. That's payment enough. As they gathered their papers, Karen approached, her composure noticeably strained but still fighting to maintain her dignified appearance. Mr. Harmon, she said tightly, this isn't over. We have contracts with our campers' families. The logistics of relocating are your problem, not mine, Joe interrupted. You got 48 hours. You don't understand the position this puts me in, Karen hissed, lowering her voice. Some of these parents can make your life very difficult. Westbrook stepped forward. Ms. Westfield, I represent 17 of your campers' families, including 3 on your board of directors. They've all been fully briefed on the situation. Karen paled visibly. You what? In fact, Westbrook continued, checking his watch, right about now, your board should be receiving my detailed report on your activities, including your collaboration with William Harmon to fraudulently access private property. For the first time since she'd arrived on his land, Joe saw real fear in Karen's eyes. You're bluffing, she whispered.